Hi, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before. If you haven't, I'm Gemma and I talk about books. And this video is my first ever reading wrap-up. So these are the books that I read in January. So the first book that I read in January, the first book I read in 2022 was Retribution by Val Mcdermid. So if you're not familiar with this series, this is the Tony Hill and Carol Jordan series. So Tony Hill is a police profiler and Carol Jordan is a senior police officer, and together they hunt down serial killers, rapists, just the most evil people in society. So I started reading the series again last year, and this is number 7. So it might seem a bit weird having a 7th book in the series in my first ever wrap-up, but that's just how things have happened. So in this particular book, the villain from book 2 returns. So something that's I think quite important to know about this series is that storylines of the characters, relationship of the characters, things that have happened to secondary characters, not necessarily always the two main ones, do carry on. So you do actually need to read this series in order. It's not really one that you can kind of pick and choose which books you want to read. So yeah, as I say, the villain from book 2 returns. I'm not going to give any spoilers. I'm not going to say what he did, why he was in prison, how he gets out. But as you can probably guess from the title, he's not happy and he wants revenge. It's as close to a trigger warning as you're probably ever going to get from me. Val Mcdermid is very descriptive, and her villains are horrific. They do horrific things to completely innocent people. So there is horrific murder, there's rape, there's torture, there's really just quite disgusting behaviour. So if you are of a sort of sensitive disposition, shall we say, these books probably aren't for you. They can be quite shocking and disturbing, and I think they do take some getting used to, but if you really do like your graphic crime thrillers, then these are some of the best. And yeah, I can't wait to continue the series. The next book I started was a non-fiction, and this unfortunately ended up being a DNF, and that is Hysteria by Andrew Scull. Now I didn't DNF this because I didn't enjoy it, and you might notice that I've still got my bookmark in there, and that is because I do intend to go back to this at some point. So this is literally the history of the word hysteria and how its use has changed over the centuries. Yeah, this is a non-fiction. This is actually an academic book. So it's you don't need to have a degree to read this, but it is written in quite a dry language. It's very interesting. I did find it interesting, but it was at the very beginning of the month, the very beginning of the year, so I just think I wasn't quite ready for that sort of book, but I definitely intend to get back to this at some point this year. So next I read The Turn of the Screw and Other Stories by Henry James. So this is a collection of 4 stories, the first one being The Turn of the Screw. And I love that story. It's a proper sort of gothic horror, but I love that it's kind of left up to the reader to decide whether or not it's an actual ghost story. So this book is about a young woman who goes to work in a house to be the governess to 2 children, and immediately we realise that there's something not quite right about these kids. The boy has basically been thrown out of school, and they're just a little bit weird. But the thing with this book is that the narrator is the governess, and we know almost nothing about her. So she remains completely unnamed throughout the story. We're given no backstory to her at all. We find out nothing about her history. And almost as soon as she arrives, she falls in love with these 2 children. And you immediately get the sense that she has kind of crossed a line somewhere with these children. You know, they're not just 2 children that she's paid to look after. She really has completely fallen for their charms. So she believes that the house and the children are being haunted. Whether or not that is true, it's up to you as the reader, because she is so unreliable. She's extremely led by her emotions. She doesn't really come across like a governess. She's almost just adopted these children of her own, and she's got no professional distance between them. And the story ends in a really interesting way. I actually really love it. I know quite a lot of people don't like this book. They're not that keen on Henry James's writing. He writes in quite a convoluted way. And because we're in the mind of the governess, it's a bit of a weird, it's got a bit of a weird tone to the writing, and I know quite a lot of people don't like that. So as I say, there are 3 other stories in this collection, and I didn't love them as much as the first. For me, The Turn of the Screw is the definitive story in this by Henry James. I'm not really that familiar with his other writing, and judging by this book in particular, I'm not entirely convinced that I would want to read more by him. I did give this 4 stars, but that is based pretty much on just one of the stories. So the next book I read is actually a collection of children's stories, but with a bit of a difference. So this is The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers by Jen Campbell. So these are short stories taken from around the world that she has retold with a twist. So they have been brought right up to date, modernised, and made more diverse. So she has taken the stereotypical sort of fairy tale princess, the Prince Charming, knight in shining armour type role, and reverse them. So in some of the stories it's actually the woman rescuing the male. There are characters of colour, there is queer representation, and there are characters with disabilities and deformities. And actually they were the ones that grabbed me the most, because a lot of the time in children's books it's the villain who looks different, who doesn't conform to societal looks and sort of how they're presented. And things like disability and deformities really are used to signify somebody who can't be attractive, which I think it's, you know, finally it's being recognised that actually not only is it wrong, but it's damaging, and it's just a really unhealthy way of teaching children about themselves and those around them. Some of these stories are really, really good fun. If you love the original sort of grim fairy tales where they were quite grotesque and gruesome, I think some of these will be right up your street, because I thought they were great. The next book that I read in January was The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson. I really, really enjoyed this. I know that this is one of those books that's really hit and miss for some people, but I really enjoyed it. It is a family who move into a house, and the previous family who lived there were murdered by their son. Now, that part of the story is actually based on truth. The names and details of that murder, and then the family who moved into the house later on, they really did exist. That is based on complete fact. And I believe that the son actually died at some point last year, which kind of made reading this right at the beginning of this month a little bit weird. But then the second family move into the house, and almost immediately weird stuff starts happening. They have a priest come to the house to sort of cleanse it. They immediately start noticing that strange things are happening in the house. They start feeling a presence. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to give spoilers, because this is a really short book. It's less than 200 pages, but actually quite a lot happens in it. So the way this is written is, it's almost as though Jay Anson went and interviewed the various people who were involved and has just made a book out of their accounts. So there isn't really a lot of description about the people. He's, you know, he doesn't tell you what they will look like, because that's not interesting. That's not important to the story. What's important to the story is the house and the activities that go on in and around the house, and to one specific person who is not in the house but is still affected, and that's the priest, purely because he went there and did the cleansing ritual, if you like. So they only lived in the house for less than a month because of what was going on and what was happening to them. There, obviously, anything paranormal, it's completely up to you whether or not you believe it. I personally am a huge skeptic when it comes to anything like that. Yes, I find it interesting, I find it a bit creepy, I love reading horror, and that's generally based on something supernatural happening. As to whether or not I genuinely believe in ghosts and that sort of thing, I'm probably towards the no camp, but this is a really interesting book. It does make you think. It's very, you know, it's creepy, and it probably will have you checking the windows at night, and, you know, if you're sat reading it and you suddenly feel a draft on the back of your neck, you probably will be looking around wondering what the hell. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. I gave it 4.5 stars, and yeah, if you're into horror, if you like a good spooky supernatural book, then I would recommend it. So next up we have The Turtle Boy by Calum Burke. Now, Calum Burke is fast becoming one of my new favourite authors. I discovered him last year, and I'm slowly working my way through his short stories, and I am loving them. I've not always been a fan of short stories. I find that, you know, sometimes you're just really getting into it and then suddenly that's it, it stops. But he has been absolutely brilliant at just grabbing me, grabbing hold, not letting go, pretty much smacking me in the face with whatever he's written, and then just kind of leaving me just, what the hell. So this one is about two young boys. They are on school holidays, it's summer, they've gone down to a lake near where they live, and they bump into another boy who they've never seen before. But there's something weird about him. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but this author's descriptions are, I mean, they're sickening. they're kind of horrifying, but to an extent where you can't stop reading. You've got to carry on. And yeah, so I'm not really going to tell you a huge amount about this because it is so short. It's, let me just double check. Yeah, it's about 110 pages, this story. And I mean, it's like a punch to the gut, it really is. And the ending, I didn't actually realise that this is a series, but I'm not sure I would actually read the others because I just think this is so good on its own. The ending just had me completely floored. So as much as I love this author, I kind of just like this story as a one-off on its own. So I'm more inclined to just go off and read some of his other stories than maybe read the others. I don't know. If you've read The Turtle Boy and you have read the others in that series, I'm not sure what the series is actually called. Oh, Timmy Quinn, there you go, it's written on the back, just found it. If you have read the rest of the Timmy Quinn series, please let me know in the comments as to whether or not it's worth it and what you thought of them. And then if I decide to read the others, obviously I'll let you know later on. So the next book I read is another non-fiction, and I had actually read this one before, so this was a reread. But a really, really good one that I enjoy. So this is Mr. Briggs' Hat by Kate Culhoon. And this is a true story, a true crime story from 1864. So Thomas Briggs was the first person to ever be murdered on a train in the UK. And it was a pretty brutal murder, and it grabbed headlines everywhere, all over the UK, Europe, even in America. I've got a bit of a thing for Victorian true crime. I don't know why. I just find it fascinating. I love reading about how they investigated back then, before, you know, we had forensics and DNA and everything like that. I just love reading it. I think it's fascinating. And also just the general attitudes of people and the police, and how they went about investigating, what they thought about the victims, how they decided who they thought the killers were. So they tracked down their suspect, who had gotten a boat to America. So this crime took British police all the way to America. They had to go through the American legal system in order to get this guy back to the UK to have a trial. And somebody was hanged for this crime. But as with a lot of crimes and executions back then, there is always a shadow of doubt. So the way this book is written is it really details the time period, how passenger trains had only really just come into use, and people were really suspicious about simply using a train, and the fact that somebody was then killed on one actually led to a lot of people saying, well, this is proof that they're just too dangerous and we shouldn't be using them. It then also details the general society of the time, how we had first class passengers, second class passengers, how they would never really mix on trains, so there was a huge suspicion about who could have actually done this crime. And then it takes you through to how they hunted down the person they thought did it. The trial itself, there's a lot of detail in that. And then it really does end with you kind of being able to decide for yourself whether or not you think they actually got it right. I'm not going to give my opinion because I think you should read it for yourself and decide. But yeah, I really like this book. I really like the way she wrote it. I really just liked her writing, to be honest. And it was a really, really interesting crime that I think not a huge amount of people will have actually heard of, despite the publicity it got at the time. And then the final book I read in January was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This was a weird one because I had actually read this as a teenager and I thought it was spooky, I thought it was creepy, I thought it was really atmospheric. I did think it was scary, and then I reread it 20 years on and I still thought it was very atmospheric. I particularly loved the descriptions of the house, but otherwise I just didn't find this creepy at all, and it was really strange because I distinctly remember the first time I read this thinking, yeah, this is a proper horror novel. This is a story of a doctor who, Dr. Montague, who invites a group of people to spend some time in what is believed to be a haunted house. So there are two women and another man who is actually the heir to the house, and they all go and stay and are basically supposed to be investigating paranormal activity. So as I say, I really like the descriptions of the house. It makes you feel very uncomfortable. There's something that isn't quite right. None of the corners are straight. The walls are at strange sort of angles. There are too many stairs, it seems, for this house. When you're outside, the way the windows align with each other and the doors then are completely different once you're inside. So none of the rooms are quite how they should be. and doors randomly shut themselves even when they've been sort of pinned open. So there's definitely something about the house. It's hugely atmospheric. I really loved the way Shirley Jackson wrote about it, and there are sort of things that happen when they go bump in the night. It's clearly meant to scare, but it just felt off. It didn't quite do what I hoped it would do. I think the thing for me with this book that really just kind of tipped it into just not really working for me was the fact that every single character in this book is unbelievably unlikable. Every single one of them. They are narcissistic, they're spiteful and snide, and towards the end another two characters turn up, and I just kind of thought they were completely pointless because they really didn't add anything to the story. They didn't add anything to the dynamic of the group. And the book ends with this event, shall we call it, that I just didn't really see the point of. It just didn't do it for me at all, unfortunately. I know that Shirley Jackson is a massive name in horror writing, and I desperately wanted to read this because, weirdly, I own quite a few of her books. They are up there, you can't see them at the moment. And yeah, so I'm hoping to sort of work my way through them all over the course of this year. But I'm now really hoping that I enjoy them more than I did this one. I gave this one 3.5 stars, but it's purely on the descriptive writing rather than the plot and the characters. So yeah, I'm a little bit let down by this one, I'm afraid. So they are the books that I read in January.